It's crazy to me that Black Americans think that Black British people are jealous of them. And it's even more crazy to me that Black British people think that Black Americans don't know their heritage. Hey Huns, welcome to my channel. I'm dami.zain, the professional yapper. Thank you for clicking on this video and coming onto my channel. Hopefully you are here to stay. If you are returning, thank you for coming back. And just a quick shout out to my new subscribers. I see you. I love you. Thank you so much for the support. By the title of this video, you already know what I'm about to talk about. I'm going to attempt to talk about the feud between Black Americans and Black Britons. Lord help me. Whenever I see discourse between Black Americans and Black Britons online, it's very clear to me that neither side feels like they're being understood, and it's very frustrating. I've spoken about this on TikTok before, and I've had a lot of negative comments from Black Americans, and it's probably because they've had really bad run-ins with Black British people before, and likewise Black British people that have gone for Black Americans have probably experienced a lot of negativity from Black Americans themselves. So it's just a perpetual cycle of misunderstanding and hatred when really we should be coming in solidarity. It just so happens to be Black History Month here in the UK. And so before the month ends, I thought this would be the perfect time to kind of share a little bit more about our history and also share what I know about American history. Even though there are differences, we share a lot of similarities, especially when it comes to the topic of racism. Of course, and as usual, when it comes to any of the topics I discuss, the comments section is open. Please keep me honest when it comes to the facts that I found regarding our history and share your opinions, but please keep it respectful. I want to make sure that I get this right. So I've written a lot of the history down in my notes, and I am going to be referring to them throughout this video, just so you're aware. Now, according to the resources I have available to me, Black American history starts with slavery. I have seen some narratives online from Black Americans who say that there were always Black people in America, but I haven't been able to find anything that supports that. So if there are any resources that I can have a look at that can broaden my knowledge around that and you're aware of, please drop them in the comments. So we all know that Africans were taken to what we now know as the United States in 1619, and for over 200 years, they were subjected to slavery, and it was a brutal reality for them. By the time the Civil War ended in 1865 and slavery was abolished, the damage was already done and the racial inequalities didn't disappear. After slavery ended, Black Americans faced the Jim Crow laws, which was basically legal segregation that kept Black people separated from whites. During this time, they weren't given the same rights, the same opportunities as white people, and they were treated as the bottom of society for about 100 years. And it wasn't until the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s that Black Americans started to see any progress when it came to racial inequalities. Of course, the struggles didn't end with the civil rights movement. If we were to fast forward till today, we know that there is still systematic racism in the United States. Think of police brutality, economic inequality, and mass incarceration. And this is why movements like Black Lives Matter have become so important. I'm aware that some people question the validity of Black Lives Matter and other movements alike, but it goes without saying that for Black Americans, it is a consistent and continuous fight against racism. Now, if I'm going to shift to Black British history, it's a little bit different. There's evidence of Africans being in Britain from as early as the 1500s. There's literally paintings from the Roman times and the Tudor times that show that Black people were here in Britain. Really, a significant part of Black British history starts from the transatlantic slave trade. Unlike America, Britain didn't have slavery on its own soil. Instead, people were taken from Africa to what we now know as the Caribbean, and the Caribbean was colonized by the British. So the Africans that were taken to the Caribbean were either sold to the Americans as part of the slave trade, or they were slaves in the Caribbean for the British. Britain officially abolished the slave trade in 1807, and then slavery in the colonies wasn't abolished until 1833. After slavery was abolished, many previously enslaved people remained in Britain. They were contributing to the economy and the culture, but of course they were still facing discrimination. and Britain still had control over the Caribbean colonies, but also the other countries that they had colonized as well. That includes some parts of Africa, like where I'm from, Nigeria. It was after all of this that the Windrush generation came along. So after World War II, people from the Caribbean were invited to come to the UK to help rebuild it. These people were given British citizenship. So from the moment that they were here to help build the train lines, build the NHS, and etc., they were considered as Black Britons. Of course, they faced discrimination. For example, bad housing, tough job prospects, and racism in the streets. This shouldn't be a surprise though, because given the fact that the British played a vital role in the slave trade and they were colonizing other countries up and down, of course, they were still looking at people who were not white as other, and therefore racism still existed. Now, if I'm going to fast forward to the 80s now, the 1980s, racial tension exploded in certain parts of London, like Brixton. And then the tragic murder of Stephen Lawrence in the 90s really highlighted just how deep racism was running in British society. And Black Britons are still fighting for the injustices at the hands of racism till today. We recently had the EDL riots. Black people and brown people were still being attacked simply because of the colour of their skin and assumptions around their faith. And just like in the US, in the UK, we have a Black Lives Matter movement as well. And then if we're going to throw in Black Britons of African descent by way of immigration, who are still considered as Black British because they were born here, but the only difference is they're either first or second generation because somewhere down the line, someone in their family immigrated to Britain. The main reason why they immigrated is because the Europeans had left their countries in such bad state that they felt that they had no choice but to come to Britain for a better chance at life. Technically, that should be part of the Black British conversation, not just Windrush and people that are descendants of slavery but came from the Caribbean. Africans were also taken into war. Africans were also used as slaves in their own homes when Britain had colonized those countries. And this makes Black British history a lot more complex. I really could delve into immigration and why Africans don't refer to themselves as Black, why they don't understand racism until they get to westernized countries, and etc. But I feel like that's a conversation that I can probably do another time. Given what we know about the Black American history and the Black British history, there's one clear difference. The fight against slavery and segregation happened on American soil, whereas in Britain, it was more about colonialism and the legacy of an empire. Now, here's where things get a bit tricky because for both Black Americans and Black Britons, our history is massively undertaught. In the UK, we are taught British history through the lens of whiteness. And we're only really given the month of October to celebrate Black History Month. And even during Black History Month, we're typically taught about Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, how the UK abolished slavery. We're not really taught about the in-between or what sits outside of that. For example, the Black people that were here in the 1500s. And having spoken to my family in America and a few other creators that I'm in close contact with, I also know that in the States, depending on the state that you're in, heavily determines the education that you receive. If you're in a state that has a higher population of Black people, your education system and what you're taught about Black history is slightly different to people that live in a state with less of a Black population. So in turn, we're going to have Black British people that don't understand the depths of the systematic racism in the US and how the Jim Crow laws and mass incarceration massively shaped the Black American experience. And likewise, a lot of Black Americans might not know about Windrush or the anti-racist movements we have here in the UK. I think that it's because of this lack of education that there's often a clash between the two demographics. And because of this butting heads is the reason why we have Black Americans thinking that Black British people are jealous of them, hate them, don't like them. And likewise, why a lot of Black British people think you lot don't know our history. What is it so hard to understand? And etc. and etc. Personally, I think we need to do better when we're talking about our identity and racism as Black people in the Western world. First of all, we need to realize that our experiences are similar, but they're not identical. When we assume that one struggle perfectly mirrors the other, it's very easy to dismiss what the other is saying, and therefore both sides start to feel misunderstood. from the discussions I've had with other Black Americans, it's clear that as a British person, we can often be a bit insensitive when we talk about things like, I know my history, I know where I come from. That language is very triggering to a Black American. Not only does it come across as though it's dismissive of Black American culture, but it also comes across as, oh, I think I'm better than you because I know that I come from this country in Africa. Failing to understand how traumatic and how sensitive the topic of slavery is and the domino effect that has had on the systematic racism that has happened in America. Black Britons often trace their roots to the Caribbean, whereas Black Americans trace their roots directly to Africa. They literally built their culture brick by brick. They created their own ethnic group. Just understanding that context has helped me to talk to Black Americans a bit better. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm sure someone's going to find offense in something that I've said in this very video today. But this is why I open up my comment section to have these discussions so that we can talk about it proactively. I want to be kept honest. I want to learn more, not just about Black American culture, not just about African culture, not just about British culture, but I want to learn more about Black culture across the world so that when I'm talking to another Black person, there's an understanding that we have a common ground and I can enter that conversation with empathy. Social media is the perfect tool for building bridges between the two demographics. Instead of arguing, we just need to listen more and ask questions. We need to take it upon ourselves to try to understand the other's context, and we need to be willing to learn each other's histories. Without understanding each other's context and taking a beat in order to be like, okay, where is this other person coming from? We're never going to have empathy in the community and we're never going to have solidarity. Despite the discourse and the feud between the two, we can't get away from the fact that Black American and Black British history is interconnected. We're all part of a global fight against racism. I'm not an expert in Black American history, nor am I an expert in Black British history. Everything that I've discussed today has come out of research that I've personally done. I'm not expecting my video to automatically unify the whole Black nation across the world, but I'm hoping it provides a different perspective into this conversation. I would really want for people to share resources in the comments and try to draw good examples of how we can fight against racism in our respective countries. If there are any questions about the Black British experience and how we deal with racism here, I'm very happy to do another video about that another time. Just leave them in the comments. Likewise, if you are a Black British person and you have any questions for Black Americans, let's start a healthy discussion in the comments, but please keep it respectful. Anyway, whether it's Black Lives Matter in the US or anti-racist movements in the UK, we're all fighting against the same thing. Systematic racism, police violence, economic inequality, and how we're portrayed in the media, just to name a few.